Sometimes we are prisoners of our own way of seeing things. Take, for example, the state of Texas, and how all of its diversity and culture can be taken for granted when we decide to live in a bubble. Luckily for you, we're here to expand your Texan horizons with another episode of the Texan Italian Stories. Today we're exploring the Italian community of San Antonio, Texas, the third largest city in the Lone Star State. A place that has a special old city kind of vibe. Walking through its streets, you feel that if each building were to talk, it would probably tell you thousands of interesting stories. Nowadays, San Antonio has become popular around the world because of its basketball team, the San Antonio Spurs. The team that without any flamboyant stars has been able to win 5 NBA titles in 15 years. For Italians, the Spurs are well known for being the home of Bellinelli, the first Italian national to ever win an NBA title. In 2014, the Spurs were by far the most international team in the NBA. Something that makes sense for San Antonio, a city that is very proud of its multicultural heritage. They're so proud of it that they have their own museum called the Institute of Texan Cultures, dedicated to the different ethnic groups that are present in the city and in the state of Texas. One of the exhibits is obviously on Italian culture. In it, you can learn about Texan Italians such as Sam Lucchese, the famous bootmaker. Or you can learn about his daughter, Josephine, who was a great opera singer. Or you can learn more about Pompeo Copini, the Italian sculptor who fell in love with Texas. Copini's work can be seen all over the city. I personally recommend for you to visit the Scottish Rite Temple on Avenue E. The impressive doors were created by this Italian sculptor from Mantova, Italy. The relationship between Italy and San Antonio goes way back. In the book, The Italian Experience in Texas, the author Dr. Valentine Belfiglio tells us that there have been reports of Italians coming to this area even before San Antonio was part of Mexico. Now, talking about Mexico, as much as the Italian culture is prevalent, no other culture is more present in this city than Mexican culture. After all, more than 700,000 people in San Antonio claim to have Mexican ancestry. Mexican in San Antonio, though, is its own thing. This is one of the oldest Mexican-American communities in the entire United States. That said, it is almost impossible to talk about the Italian community in San Antonio without talking about the relationship between Mexico, Italy, and Texas. This is the reason why we have called this episode the TexMex Italians. We traveled to San Antonio, Texas to spend 2.5 days there, listening to different stories from Italians, Italian Americans, and Italophiles who live in that city. Our first interview was in the neighborhood of Alamo Heights. There, we met with actor Peter Gonzalez Falcon. Peter's family is not Italian. Nonetheless, his relationship with Italy is quite remarkable. In the early 70s, Peter was hired by the iconic Italian movie maker Federico Fellini to play the lead role in his film Roma, where Peter portrayed a young version of Fellini himself. Now, Texas was very different from Rome at that point. However, Peter tells us how everything felt as if it were meant to happen.
I just remember when I got to Rome, I felt perfectly at home. It was as if that was where I was from. I just stepped out of the plane in Fiumicino and I saw all the people running around and doing everything, and they looked just like my family.
If you take into consideration that Peter was barely starting in the world of acting when he got that role, this story is pretty amazing. I mean, Fellini could have asked any Italian actor to play him, and they would have said yes. So why would he have chosen a young actor of Mexican descent, born and raised in a border town in Texas?
People didn't travel much. It was just kind of miraculous that I would have gotten there in the first place. And I think it was part of destiny and fate.
Maybe it was fate. Or maybe it was just another mystery that Fellini left for us to decipher. He had toyed with the idea of making a movie in Mexico at some point in his career. But maybe it was just the fact that Peter looked like a prettier version of Fellini, and the director liked that. After all, Peter's appearance, just like one of many people of Mexican descent, looks as if he could be Italian, which should be of no surprise since many Mexicans are actually descendants of Italians. Just as Italians moved into the US, especially in the late 1800s, many Italians moved to Mexico. Some of them as part of a program that the President Porfirio Diaz had implemented to bring Europeans to his country so they could teach farming and commerce to the locals. Peter, who spent a great deal of time in Mexico after he lived in Italy, told us about a town called Chipilo, a suburb of the city of Puebla. Going to Chipilo makes you feel as if you were in a little tiny Italian town right in the middle of Mexico. Today, more than 100 years after the first Italians settled in this area, everyone still speaks in Veneto dialect to each other.
Allora, siamo a Cipilo. Cipilo è una comunità italiana, discendente di italiani, fondata nel 1882 per immigranti soprattutto della regione del Veneto, ma ci sono anche dei lombardi, dei piemontesi, c'è qualche famiglia, ma la maggior parte è sempre veneta.
Yes, I know. Italians in Mexico. The concept is actually very simple and obvious. Nonetheless, coming from Texas, where Italian and Mexican are considered as two completely different cultures, finding out that that's not always the case was kind of refreshing. And that's why Peter mentioned Chipilo, because he thinks it is an example of things he learned from Fellini, like how everything is connected and nothing is just as it seems. These ideas have influenced Peter's life and his work as an actor, a writer, and a producer. Nowadays, he feels happy that Texas is finally starting to understand what he understood almost 40 years ago in Italy.
We were killing each other 100 years ago, and here we are intermarried, our children are intermixed, and, we don't have preconceived notions of, just because you're Mexican, you're the maid, and because you're German, you're the scientist, or whatever. Everyone's everything.
That night, after talking to Peter, we visited the famous downtown Riverwalk. We learned that this city was named after a Portuguese man named Antonio, who died in Padua, Italy, was later canonized by the Vatican, and brought as a saint to Texas by the Spaniards. I couldn't help but thinking that maybe our entire stay in San Antonio would be something like that. A collection of stories and people whose real origin is hard to pinpoint. Like our tour guide, who knew everything about every culture that came to San Antonio. And when we asked him where he was from, guess what he said?
I am second generation Italian, second generation American of Italian descent. My mother, first generation full-blood Italian, her name was Lanzarote.
On our second day in San Antonio, we began in the neighborhood of Monticello, the most Italian-sounding neighborhood in San Antonio. There we met with Cavaliere Francesco Cristadoro. Francesco has lived in San Antonio for more than 4 decades and has a passion for telling the history of the Italian community in the city. He told us that there had used to be an actual Italian neighborhood and showed us some of the different businesses that still stand. The neighborhood drastically changed once the intersection of Highway I-35 and I-10 was built right in the middle. Francesco is truly a box of surprises. For example, he personally met Pope John Paul II and played a crucial role in convincing the Pope to come to San Antonio, which he finally visited in 1987. Francesco's house is like a little piece of Italy in San Antonio. Francesco also holds the title of Corrispondente Consolare, which means he is responsible for supporting the needs of Italians in that part of Texas.
San Antonio, essendo una città militare, parecchi dei militari si sono sposati o a Vicenza o Gavaghiri o altra o giù in Puglia, diciamo, a servizio dei normanni, e quindi dopo un po' di tempo c'erano ovviamente problemi legali, qualcuno doveva andare in corte, quindi avendo l'autorità consolare sarà molto più facile.
Later that day, we went with Francesco to La Focaccia in the King Williams district, which is owned by his inseparable friend Luigi. At some point, Francesco, Luigi, and their friends were all young Italian pilots who came to San Antonio as part of the military programs that existed between Italy and the US. From that group, Francesco was the only one who married an Italian woman. The rest married Texan women of Mexican descent. As a result, their children have grown up with both Tejano and Italian cultures, which I find fascinating. However, coming from these two different ethnic backgrounds can also present its challenges, especially in the south of the US.
There are problems, there are chips on my shoulder, there are hurts that I have that maybe the other Italian boys and girls that grew up with Italian and Mexican mothers didn't have the same problem. But I always have been aware in San Antonio of class distinction and racial distinction.
World-renowned artist Franco Mondini Ruiz is the son of another Italian named Gino Mondini, who belonged to the same group of friends as Francesco and Luigi. Franco's work is very respected in the art community. He has been the recipient of the prestigious Rome Prize. One of his sculptures can be seen at the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. Franco believes that his art has been influenced by the racial tensions that exist between his Mexican and his Italian origins.
Italians are good artists, Italians are, scientific experts, Italians have beautiful cars, Italians have beautiful women, there's Fellini and all that stuff. All of that helped me. And there was nothing going on in my Mexican side that was being affirmed. There was nothing. We didn't even know about Mexico. San Antonio is just a 90-minute flight away, but an American kid will know more about Italy than it will know about Mexico.
Despite Franco's frustration, he has been able to turn his internal struggle into beautiful art pieces that can now be enjoyed by everyone. He doesn't know if his art will bring people together, but he does know it can at least be used to make people feel and think about these important issues. With this in mind, that night we visited one of Franco's friends, amazing Italian-American artist Patrice Villastrigo. Patrice's grandparents were artists as well. Her grandfather was known as Wild Bill Villastrigo. His family was one of the many Italians who moved to San Antonio from Calabria. Bill, along with his wife, Annie Corrine, were known as the Texas Duo, a charismatic vaudeville act. Coming from this background, Patrice agrees with Franco Mondini that it is to each one of us to feel the responsibility to open ourselves to understanding other cultures.
When I hear people say, blame my parents for this and this, my teacher for this, stop it, Yes, our parents and our guardians and our guides when we were younger have an awful lot to do with who we are, but we have everything to do with whom we become.
Patrice does not only believe this, she acts upon it. In fact, she has spent most of her artistic career singing in different languages and often visiting different countries to find her inspiration. Now, when we asked her how she felt about Italy and Texas, this is what she answered.
They're both home. It's that simple.
When I was brought in, the very first thing that struck me was the story. It's a compelling story. It's an incredible legacy, and I have a real sense of responsibility to try to help bring that to fruition.
The project that award-winning architect Roberto Trevino is talking about is a very interesting idea that was shared with us on our last day in San Antonio. Let me introduce to you the San Antonio Little Italy project. When we think about the future of the Italian community in San Antonio, this is the type of idea that could really make a difference. Little Italy will be a self-sustainable Italian neighborhood created on the grounds of the Christopher Columbus Italian Society in San Antonio. Imagine having a piece of Italy in Texas where people could live and help one another. In many ways, a tribute to Spezzano della Silla in Calabria, the place of origin of most of San Antonio's Italian Americans.
Everybody's from the same town. And if you dig back, you dig deep enough, you'll find out that somebody that you've known all your life is related to you. You know, her grandmother was your grandmother's sister or cousin or something. And I think that's something that you can't lose. You've got to stay up on that, and you've got to promote that so people understand that we're all in this together.
Frank Monaco is one of the visionaries behind the Little Italy project. He thinks that just as his ancestors founded the Italian Society in San Antonio, now is up to their descendants to do something equally important for the Texan Italian community.
We envision basically a small community here, just like in the old town, where people can live and function. We're basically not ever having to leave this. We want the project, the village, we would like to have that kind of self-sustaining where people that wish that kind of life can stay down here. We'd like to have coffee shops in there and maybe little vegetable shops, a little grocery store of some sort. Years ago, that's what we had in this area. Every block had a small grocery store in it. People wouldn't even have to leave the neighborhood to sustain themselves here.
Frank is referring to the Italian neighborhood that Francisco had told us about, the same one that existed where this highway intersection now stands. Perhaps the best way of envisioning the future of the Italian community is by revisiting the past, just as Frank Monaco is doing. Progress can make our lives easier, like these highways do, but progress can also make us forget where we come from. Interesting enough, the Little Italy project has already allowed San Antonio to reconnect with its past. Historians discovered that the first major European settlement in San Antonio was exactly where Little Italy will now be. Now, I don't know if Little Italy will solve the racial tensions that Franco Mondini told us exist in San Antonio, but the fact that this project has been possible because of the joint effort between an Italian American and a Mexican American, I think makes the future look promising, regardless of ethnicity. Robert thinks Little Italy could be a model for other communities around the country that are looking to preserve their heritage. It is not about Italian or Mexican, it is about being human.
So much passion and heart in this project. I feel that this is probably the most important, if not the best project I'll ever work on in my entire life.
We've got plans to revitalize the hall and have other activities at the hall on a daily basis. A community. This is a community just like the one we left. People strolling through the park, strolling through the piazzas in the village, and basically go back to a different lifestyle than the hustle and bustle of freeways and driving 40 or 50 miles each way to work every day.
For our last interview, we traveled to an area of San Antonio called Windcrest, famous for its speeding tickets and its golf course. It is here where Chef Miguel Cavanna serves dinner by appointment only, and where we met a lively group of Argentinian Italians.
Che bella cosa, una giornata di sole, un'aria serena, dopo una tempesta, per l'aria fresca, pare di una festa, che bella cosa, una giornata e sole.
Argentina is one of the countries with the largest concentration of Italian immigrants in the entire world. Given that San Antonio's Manu Ginobili is an Argentinian Italian, we thought it was important to tell the story of this group before we left the city.
Quello che è successo, l'Argentina ci dicevano l'America povera, perché primo hanno venuto qua l'America, però in quel tempo se chiude l'immigrazione, e nel tempo della guerra se chiude l'immigrazione qua, gli italiani, come tanti europei, a dove andiamo? Andiamo all'America povera, c'è l'America ricca, andiamo all'America povera, che era l'Argentina in quel tempo, no?
Io penso che ci sono una meschia di tutti gli italiani l'Argentina veramente, non solo di Genova, Piemonte o...
No, c'era un po' più grande quel stile di immigrazione.
Ecco.
Signor Augusto is the person that invited us here. He was a pioneer in bringing the pizza concept to food courts of shopping malls in Texas. Augusto is very connected with his Italian heritage and has a special love for the Italian language.
Tutte le lingue hanno uno spirito di qualcosa. Per me la lingua italiana c'ha lo spirito dell'allegria, della risalta, di essere sempre contento.
Through all my life here in Texas, I had never connected with this group of Italians, despite the obvious similarities that exist between us. I had to bring up the question, how could that be?
Il fatto che siamo tutti occupati di una maniera o un'altra, ci troviamo quando muore qualche amico o quando c'è una festa importante. Sì.
Lui c'ha ragione, tante volte non c'è il tempo, tante volte stai qui dalle 7-8 della mattina fino alla sera, no?
Outside, we were joined by a Venezuelan Italian and her friend. There we continued the conversation about the different reasons why all Italian communities in the world are still so separated from each other.
Italia come composta di tante piccole culture, chiamiamo, sono le stati, sono culture, perché no, anche la regione è grande, però hanno il ballo tipico, il mangiare tipico, allora questo divide un po'.
Despite our divisions, that day we all had to agree that things are definitely changing.
El mundo de ser así se ha convertido así, porque todos tenemos contacto con todo el mundo, ¿okay? El internet les permite a los chicos jóvenes ver cómo viven en Italia, en Argentina y comprender el porqué de las cosas.
Así es que yo creo que la nueva generación está mostrándonos a los más experimentados que pues la cultura puede avanzar y podemos apreciar las diferencias entre las culturas.
To wrap up this episode, we went to see Sicilian singer-songwriter Fabrizio Camarata play in our hometown of Austin, Texas. We felt that Fabrizio represented that new generation of Italians that see the world much more connected.
We were a little bit Arabs and we were a little bit Romans and Greeks and Spanish and French and Germans. I mean, so this is not such a big deal for people like me and for Sicilians in general, because it's normal. It's like we've always been a melting pot.
parece que están llorando. Ay de mí, llorona, 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 llévame al río. Ay de mí, llorona, 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 llévame al río. Tápame con tu rebozo, llorona, porque me muero de frío. Tápame con tu rebozo, llorona, porque me muero de frío. A un santo Cristo de fierro, llorona mis penas, le